Thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate you being here. The Ames Public Library is proud to present this program with the Ames History Museum and the NAACP. And we are excited to hear from Ross Wilburn. Please take it away, Ross.
Very good. Thank you so much, everyone. Am I live on the mic in the room? Wave at me in the back if you can hear me. That's fantastic. If you're online, I can't see you, but thank you so much for joining. It's an honor to be here with you on Juneteenth, on Freedom Day, to share a few examples of the trials and tribulations that my ancestors went through in my genealogy search. So this is a combination of a little bit about the United States Colored Infantry and my family and some pension records, as well as just my general interest in genealogy. I'll leave plenty of time for questions. And so I think there might be a couple historians, both genealogy and Civil War. And so anything you want to contribute with a comment and or a question, that'd be fantastic. Pictured, that's a picture of my great-great-grandparents on my mother's side. Harrison Tilford Gash is on the left. His name that he enlisted in is General Gash. That was not his rank. He was a sergeant when he mustered out or exited. And in his pension file, which I have a couple excerpts from, I discovered that they were investigating whether or not he would be worthy of a pension and a disability pension, and so he had to prove it. But he had to recount the story of him standing in line enlisting, and they say, "State your name," and he said, "General Gash." And so his pension record is under General Gash. And next to him is Anna Maria Dorsey. She's my great-great-grandmother. I don't know much about her, unfortunately, other than when I was interviewing my great-uncle or granduncle about the general, he did say he remembered Anna Maria, and he asked her about him, and he smiled and said, well, he was a good timer. He liked to have a good time. And given the comment of him joking around and saying that he was General Gash, I can see why. All right. I'm going to share about my interest in my family history, the United States Colored Infantry, specifically the 60th United States Colored Infantry and the 29th United States Colored Infantry. Some information, some documents you might find interesting, or depending on what side of the Mason-Dixon line you're on, you may not find so interesting. And then just some personal items that I found through my research that are of interest to me, and hopefully they'll be interest to you, and then some final comments and takeaways. I will start by just saying, since it is Freedom Day, that on January 1, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation declared free all slaves in the seceded states, except for those in 7 Virginia counties occupied by Union troops, 13 occupied Louisiana parishes, and the newly formed state of West Virginia. The proclamation omitted Tennessee entirely, exempting slaves there from its provisions. Toward the end of the document, the president announced cautiously that former slaves would be, quote, retrieved into the armed services of the United States to garrison forts and other places and to man vessels of all sorts in said service, end quote. So when I was growing up in high school in history class, when we heard about the Civil War, didn't hear anything about blacks, former folks who were enslaved, who fought in the Union troops or on the Confederate side. Just by a show of hands, how many of you had that saying, you heard nothing about it in high school? Yeah, right? So this was a new learning for me. I'm going to start, before I tell you a little bit about the 1st Iowa Colored Infantry, who became the 60th United States Colored Infantry. How did I get interested in the first place? By the way, the slides in here, some of them are designed for you to be able to read and see. Others are not. So if you're online streaming, you should not be able to see the individual family members on the right-hand side. And that's by design because I don't necessarily have permission from some of those to the left and just above me. I was one of those in-between kids, family of 5 kids, and I'm number 4, the youngest boy. And my younger sister's 2 years younger than me, but the cousins were all younger. And then there's a 6-year gap between my brother and myself. So at all the family cookouts and gatherings, I was kind of in between the crowds. And if you ever wonder whether the kids are listening to you at the cookouts and around the dinner table or at parties, we sure are. And I was very intrigued about stories of my parents, my grandparents, and in some cases, my great-grandparents. My father used to say at the gatherings, he looked forward to sitting around and swapping lies with folks. But I remember, even to this day, my great-grandmother on this side of the family, and by the way, the side of the family I'm talking about is the Gash side of the family. So folks on my father's side that might be watching, I'm sorry, we're talking about the Gash side of the family tonight. When I was in kindergarten, my mother was working overnights, the evening to 7 a.m. And I had kindergarten, half-day kindergarten. And so she would drop my younger sister and I off at my grandparents', and we would go back to sleep and wake up. And I remember my grandma Gash, my great-grandmother, sitting sometimes in the room just helping sit and watch me. And, well, my great-great-grandfather, Harrison, or the general, his daughter-in-law was my great-grandmother Gash. So when I talk to, especially high school students, about the Civil War, I say, it may seem like ancient history, but I remember her, and so it's not in my lifetime, someone who knew someone who was enslaved. And by the way, I didn't mention my great-grandfather, thank you for the lights, my great-great-grandfather and his family and parents were enslaved in Palmyra, Missouri, and escaped in 1864 from Palmyra, he did, and to Quincy, Illinois. And then he was enlisted and became part of the 1st Iowa Colored Infantry. So something I'm real proud of. Another way that I had an interest in my family history beyond the swap and lies at family gatherings, there was a made-for-TV series in the 1970s called Roots by Alex Haley, The Saga of an American Family. And by the way, in some libraries, this is a banned book, but I'm not going to get into politics. That's truth. It was a week-long series about the Alex Haley's family and the stories that he heard about the African, he called it in the book, whose name was Kunta Kinte. And that screenshot on the left of the screen is John Amos actor, the adult Kunta Kinte from that series. And there was a scene in there where he, after his daughter Kize was born, he went outside, and there's a blanket around here you can't see, but he took the blanket out. She was naked, held her up, and to the Creator said, "Behold, the only thing that is greater than yourself." And I know my daughter and my son are watching, and I showed them this series when they were old enough. It was probably about junior high age. And when that scene came forward, they both turned around and looked at me and said, "Did you do that to us?" And yes, I did. Went out to the park and did that. I didn't get them naked. They were in diapers, but it was fun to do. All right. United States Colored Infantry. By the way, my daughter had given me this book. It's called Freedom by the Sword on United States Colored Troops, 1862 to 1867. And it lists all of the colored infantry, United States Colored Infantry troops. It has information on where they were deployed in certain areas. It has compiled a lot of this information from letters to soldiers, And some of it is documented in the National Archives in official documents, but a lot of it was just made up from or put together, from those letters. And so it's very, very useful, very helpful. Let's see. I wanted to take a look at an excerpt here. So a lot of the states, after it was authorized to recruit and enlist freed blacks and those who were escaped from enslavement, but not every state had enough African Americans in their state to put together a colored regiment. Iowa was one of them, and so they recruited them from nearby states. And I gave you the example of my great-great-grandfather, the general, who became part of the Iowa Colored Infantry. And this book, they ended up down in Arkansas eventually. And after they were trained, and the troops, the degree of training that they received varied. Some had been trained a lot. Others, basically, they enlisted and were handed a rifle sometimes and sent out in the field. But in this book, just a little excerpt about the 1st Iowa Colored Infantry down in Arkansas. As autumn turned to winter, another black regiment, the 1st Iowa Colored Infantry, arrived in Helena, Arkansas, organized in Keokuk at the southeast corner of Iowa. The regiment had recruited largely in Missouri, but federal law allowed the state of Iowa to credit the enlistments against its own draft quota. This accorded with the wishes of Iowa's governor, who had expressed an official query to the War Department, and in a letter the governor made to Major General Henry Halleck that contained one of the most revealing comments on black recruitment by any official during the war. Now, one of the things we pride ourselves on with history, we don't necessarily have all of the history or story. Iowa has a tremendous history of first for people of color, for women, people with disabilities, but they weren't always necessarily uniform in that agreement. So the governor at the time, in the letter to Major General Halleck, said, quote, "When this war is over and we have summed up the entire loss of life it has imposed on the country, I shall not have any regrets if it is found that a part of the dead are," and he uses the N-word, "and that all are not white men." The officers and men of the 1st Iowa Colored reached Helena on 20 December 1863 and soon took up a round of duties identical to those of the 3rd Arkansas. So I mentioned that they all weren't necessarily trained, and they were not allowed to have black officers for some who had been serving before. In fact, they all had white officers. But anybody seen the movie Glory back in the 80s with Denzel Washington? And Matthew Broderick plays the officer who volunteered to lead that, in fact, went to great lengths to lead that company. That was not always the case. In fact, they had trouble finding some to serve and went to enlisted men, whites, and promoted them to officers to become officers of the black troops. And some of them didn't have necessarily the best training themselves, let alone leadership training. And so when these soldiers, the black soldiers, went into Army, there was a question at the time. In fact, in this book, you see one quote, and there's an article down at the Iowa History Museum that says, "Will they fight?" Didn't know if they would actually fight if they take up arms, and did that. And they eventually did, but initially they weren't really given, sent into direct battle. A lot of times, if it was a port along the Mississippi River, they would basically be loading ships off the docks or unloading them. Other times, when they were sent near a battlefield, guess who dug the trenches? They had the black soldiers digging the trenches. So even in the movie Glory, where you see that tension about are they going to be allowed to fight? They do a lot of drilling, practicing, and and use of their weapons. But it was a big deal when they ended up, the 54th ended up being sent into battle. On the screen, you'll see to the left, this is a black and white picture of the battle flag of the 1st Colored Regiment of Iowa. And it is on display. Well, it's in, I think it may not be on display right now. It was last year, but they have it down in the storage area. On the left, you see it's black and white, and it's very tattered, torn. To the right, you see a picture of me. This was shortly after I had discovered that this flag was in existence. You see the areas that are gold in the left-hand side. That's the actual remnants of the flag, and in between, that's where it's it was damaged. In fact, Senator Cornbach's here, and I think I might see Representative Wessel Kushel-Beth. Yep. I think earlier when you all were in your first terms, it may have been on display with a bunch of flags at the Iowa Capitol, and eventually they had to move it over to the Historical Museum because you can see that it was in pretty poor shape. What you'll notice, though, the area in blue, that's almost survived intact, and this battle flag was hand-stitched by Black women in Keokuk, Iowa, I think Burlington and Keokuk, Iowa, for the 1st Iowa Colored Infantry. So there's a lot of pride. That history of Iowa, of Black soldiers, and my ancestors is literally woven into the fabric of this flag and of the state. In Washington, D.C., there's actually a monument. It's near Howard University, so it's not in the mall where most of the monuments are down there. But there is a monument with placards, kind of like you may have seen the Vietnam memorial with the names on it. And I've got, this was maybe about 4 years ago. I was out in Washington, D.C., and you can see my kinfolk on the slide to the right there. But that entire placard is of the 60th Regiment of the United States Colored Infantry. And recall I said after they were trained, they were federalized and given a new number, the 60th. And you can see on the left, General Gash was what he's listed in, and his pension. I just love that. Now, General Gash had 2 brothers, Frank and Jefferson Gash. They were older brothers. Now, they escaped a couple months after the general did to Palmyra, Missouri, from Palmyra, Missouri to Quincy. And they had heard that, they asked about Harrison, and they heard that he enlisted, so they were going to enlist, but that he was sent to Kansas City. This is in the pension record from the interviews. Well, it wasn't Kansas City. It was Keokuk, and you can see maybe it was the telephone game, how they ended up in a different place. But again, on the right, you can see Frank and Jefferson's name. And they literally, those placards are on the front and back of about 4 rows of placards. And I found the generals, and I thought, gee, I wonder if I can find the 29th. And I just did this, and right across from the 60th is the 29th. And so I quickly was able to find their unit there. I'm going to go to the previous slide before we go into this. Another excerpt. About the Iowa unit. So from the winter of 1864, so my great-great-grandfather is in here, the general. Through the end of the war, Helena's garrison included 2 regiments of Black soldiers, the 3rd Arkansas and the 1st Iowa Colored, which were renumbered in March, the 56th and the 60th. Well, he was in the 60th, United States Colored Infantry. There were also companies from the 63rd and the 64th, United States Colored Infantry. The last 2, the 63rd, 64th, these were invalid, not invalid, invalid regiments composed of men unfit for field service, but sufficiently healthy to stand guard over contraband camps, plantations, warehouses full of government supplies, and woodyards. The Union Army included white invalids, organized as the Veterans Reserve Corps, but these were men who had been wounded in battle. Only the U.S. colored troops deliberately signed up men who had been rejected by medical examiners. So again, it wasn't uniform that black soldiers were sought out and made part of the colored infantry. The 63rd, 64th had companies scattered along the Mississippi from Memphis down south, and several companies guarded freed people settlement at Davis Bend, the site of plantations that belonged to Jefferson Davis and his brother, Joseph A few miles upstream from Helena. The guard stations included woodcutters camps on island number 60 and 63rd. So while the troops were dispatched, they would do guard duty, they would dig trenches, and really just any type of, today we would call it grunt work. So the pension file. I'll read as best I can some of the information, but these are some interesting things I found in the general's pension file. By the way, some of the information I was able to gather by myself, and I'll talk a little bit about what I was able to gather, but I did run into a little barrier when I was trying to find a pension file for the general. So I knew he had served. I knew that he was in the 60th United States Colored Infantry because I did interview my Uncle Tony, my great uncle, my granduncle. And he mentioned that he was buried in a cemetery in Galesburg, Illinois, which is where our mother and other relatives are buried. And I had no idea. So I took a trip out there and took a picture of his tombstone. And he's on his tombstone, it says Harrison Tilford Gash. And at that point, still, I didn't know about the general, didn't have the pension file. And I did as much research as I could. And one of my favorite shows is on PBS, and that's the skip Finding Your Roots. And, they mentioned that they use genealogist team from Ancestry.com. So I actually had done a DNA test, but I didn't know about or hadn't really looked into their genealogy work. And so I contacted them, and I gave them all the information that I had from interviews that I had done and names from a Bible that had the general, his mother, and his brothers and sisters on that. And I just was running into a wall at the National Archives. Well, they discovered that fact that he was the general, and they told me that typically a pension file is not very long, and for the blacks who were in the colored troops, sometimes they were a little bigger because they had to, when they were requesting a pension, they had to prove who they were. They had to justify that they were in, but really, they weren't very big files. The general's pension file is over 300 pages long. They sent, because he was requesting a pension, and he was wounded in a battle in Arkansas. His musket had a powder flash and partially blinded him. In fact, a picture, if you look real close, you can kind of see he doesn't really have any eyebrows there when the picture, I think I have it later, but we can scroll back. And so they sent some investigators, Department of War, and in the pension file, there's just all kinds of the legal paper, microfiche of the legal pads of the interviews from the investigator in longhand writing. Some is typed up, but in their longhand writing, of questions that they would ask of him, questions that they would ask of those that he served with. The grandchildren of the Shropshire family who had enslaved them in Palmyra, Missouri. So another discovery, the Shropshire family. And if you're familiar, there's a place in England, Shropshire, and there is a breed of sheep, Shropshire sheep. Say that 4 times. So they interviewed the grandchildren of the Shropshire. They interviewed a couple of his siblings, and his older brother, William Gash, I think was in his 80s when he was interviewed and had trouble recalling some facts. And so you could see they were really struggling to find out or to prove, are you who you say you are? And were you really injured? And are you, do you have this disability? It came to the point too, to add to the confusion, I mentioned that his name is Harrison Tilford. His siblings knew him as Tip, or Tippecanoe. He was Harrison Shropshire. He was Tilford Shropshire. And he had 2 brothers who also enlisted. And in the documents, interviews, they mentioned, well, they all kind of look alike. So there's 3 brothers enlisted in 2 different companies. And so it just, and I'm guessing they weren't really looking to be willing to provide that support. So some of these files that are in there, just for, what you might see in a record, on the left is when he when he enlisted, and it was in Keokuk, Iowa, October 11th, 1863. And he enlisted in Quincy, Illinois, so that's that backup proof. On the right, there's a description of him. Black hazel, black hair, didn't know, somewhere didn't know in Missouri, turns out Palmyra. He was a laborer coming in, and he mustered in 11 October in Keokuk, and it was part of the 1st Iowa Infantry. Something else that I thought was interesting, on the left, this is there's several documents after that description of kind of miscellaneous items. Well, at the bottom left, under miscellaneous, it says slave claim. So some of the folks who joined were free. Others were released by the persons who enslaved them. Others were enslaved and just escaped, and that was my great-great-grandfather. On the right, you can see his application for a pension, and about 1/3 of the way down, under class, it says, again, it's not invalid, it's invalid. He was requesting a disability claim. And you can also see, you're always looking for corroborating information that other additional services, that he was in the 1st Iowa Colored Infantry, which became the 60th. Some more interesting findings. Note that it said that he was slaved or enslaved. You can look and see endorsement for application of someone who was an attorney representing the Shropshire estate. This is a document to the War Department after the war. If you were a slaveholder and your slaves escaped and joined the Union Army, you could request compensation because your slave did services for the Union Army. How many of you did not know that, right? And so on the right-hand side, you can see just a bigger shot of that information. And not only that, you can't read this, it's tough to read, but this Mr. Anderson is the attorney filling out this information, and it's got information about, claiming that he wasn't enslaved and escaped. And you had to take an oath of allegiance. Let me back up a little bit. The general had to sign, yes, I was enslaved, even though there's documents earlier where he had said that he was freed. And his brother, Frank or Jefferson, had indicated that they were actually free before the war even started. Well, they all had to sign attesting, yes, we were enslaved by the Shropshire family. Well, so you want, there's another word that you may have heard more recently in the past 10 years. It's called reparations. So the slave owners were asking for reparations to be compensated for their slaves serving in the army. And so basically, it says that you swear that you've never, this is the slave owner, I've never joined or been concerned in an insurrection or rebellion. I have never borne arms against the United States. I've never given aid, countenance, encouragement to any person engaged. Basically, that you didn't help the Confederate Army. You swear that to the best of your knowledge and ability, you've supported, defended, and will continue to support and defend the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I supported, defended, and obeyed, and will continue to support, defend, and obey the Constitution and the laws of the United States, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I will take this oath freely without any mental reservation or purposes of evasion, so help me God. So if you're going to apply for this back pay that you did no work, but you had owned some of the, are you not going to take that oath to get paid? I'm just saying, right? So I was also able to get a hold of his brother Frank's pension. I wasn't able to get a hold of Jeff's pension, although we're still looking for that. This is, let's see. Oh, that he enlisted. I mentioned Frank and Jefferson, when they heard that that the general was sent to Kansas City, but it was Keokuk, they enlisted and went to Chicago. I have no idea why. But apparently Illinois must have also had dibs on some escaped or freed slaves to help build their draft quota. So this shows that Frank was enlisted in Chicago, Illinois, January 12th, 1864, and was mustered in the 29th. Another document that you'll see about him, that he was in Marion County, which is where Palmyra is, and that Frank Gash enlisted on that date, and attesting his loyalty. Oh, I'm sorry, I misread that. That was the Shropshire estate, again attesting that, yeah, that's Frank, and here's the oath of allegiance that you see on the screen now, again with that same oath. One of the things in trying to discern between the 60th and the 29th, just to figure out what happened, because like I said, everything's not in this book, everything's not necessarily documented well in the National Archives through the War Department, and they piece together what they can. But let's see, Frank, actually, it was a, he had applied for a pension in the Company D of the 29th Infantry. He started in 1883, but he actually died before he found out that he was not going to get his pension. But Frank, in his pension, this is a retyping of that, while engaged in the Battle of Petersburg, Virginia. So the 29th ended up in the eastern part of the United States, Virginia, and some fierce battles over there. And he's justifying what happened to him. He, while engaged in that battle, his gun was carried away by a shell, so blew it out of his hand. The concussion injuring the muscle of his right arm between the shoulder and the elbow, so that the arm had shrunk considerably, but has little strength. It's very painful and has given him a great deal of trouble since he received the injury. At the same time and place, and with the same concussion, received an injury to his right eye, which had injured his sight. So just like the general, he also had partial trouble with vision. During the battle, clubbing each other, this claimant, that would be Frank, was knocked down, and a rebel soldier jumped upon him with his feet injuring his back, receiving such a strain that he has not recovered from it. From the above injury, the declarant was relieved from duty some 3 or 4 days, did not go to the hospital, was not treated by any surgeon, used cold water baths. That doesn't sound like it would be effective. But one of the issues that came up in Frank's pension file, and in the generals too, in trying to prove who they were, it came out as they're interviewing the family members. A sister or a daughter, I think it was a daughter of one of them, had said that they thought Frank had been captured because he had broken ribs. And so part of what he's trying to show. And what was confusing again was where was he injured and whether he had medical documentation for that. This is a copy of the investigator notes, and you can see this is an interview of the general. The question, he writes down the question that he asked and the answer. The question was, while you and your mother lived slaves of the Shropshires, what name did you go by? Again, the confusion about the name. That is, what was your name? And Harrison Tilford is the answer. All my slave days, I went by that name. Question, how did you get the name Harrison Tilford? Answer, my old boss named me after General Harrison. Then he called me Tippecanoe. Tippecanoe and Tyler too. He nicknamed me all over. So they interviewed another older brother, Anderson, and Anderson was in his 80s, so they're trying to corroborate. Question, Anderson, or no, this is still to Harrison. Anderson says you took the name Harrison from your uncle, from whom you expected to get something by reason of taking his name. Which of you is telling the truth? Answer, I never had but one uncle, and his name was Bill. I don't know what his last name was. I don't know what Anderson meant by telling that. Question, Anderson says you and he went by the name of Gash while you and he were slaves. Which of you is telling the truth? Answer, well, our father's name was Gash, and of course that was our name, but we were not known by that name during slavery. The masters named the slaves, and I was Tip Shropshire or Harrison Shropshire, and was called Tip for short. Incidentally, it turned out when they were enslaved, their father was about 20 miles down the road, and who knows whether they got to see each other or not. They didn't after the war, and he didn't end up in Galesburg, Illinois, where all of the Gashes ended up, which is where I was born. Let's see, before I get to that, was there one other excerpt? Oh, about the 29th, I think. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, that's not really that interesting. Regiments, this is back to the 60th. Regiments in Arkansas remained at their post awaiting muster out. This is the end of the war and discharged. Most white soldiers saw home from the end of the year, as did members of the 60th. Free state regiments from Iowa and Kansas. Those regiments that were from the South and had enlisted later, they continued on until the end of the war. Couple items, and I'll kind of go through this quickly just so we can get to some questions. For my personal search, some items that I discovered. One that I discovered after getting help from the genealogist was that my third great-grandmother, Harrison, and Frank and Gash's mother, her name was Matilda. But with their help, other than her name and a birth date and a death date, I had no idea. And it turns out she's also buried in Galesburg, Illinois, but in a part of the cemetery where there's no tombstones. There's 20 people buried there, and amongst that group is Matilda, my third great-grandmother. But what you're looking at is an excerpt from a estate sale in Bourbon County, Missouri, which was where Matilda was brought from the Shropshire family. And the Shropshire that ended up in Missouri with Matilda and family had purchased these items from an uncle or another relative in the Shropshire state. But you can see there in red one of the items from the estate sale. One girl, Matilda, $250, and one ditto the same, a girl named Charlotte, for $250. So the two of them had to pay $500 for the two of them. So you hear about slave sales, and there's two parts to this, but to see a dollar figure attributed to my third great grandmother, it's kind of chilling, and that reminder about history and that time in history. But many, in fact, most blacks, when you get back to a certain generation or to the person who was enslaved, they're typically listed in records or census records. And a lot of times it's something like this. It's a bill of sale. And in some cases, better records kept of sale of property, those enslaved, than their own family members. So I've got the name and how much, that she was sold for. Bottom line, it was horrible what the General Harrison, his brother Frank, and I'm assuming Jeff too, had to go through to get their pensions, and the general's pension file being over 300 pages long. But what a gift to me and my siblings and other descendants to have this type of rich information and to share it with you. Just some other personal information that has come from items that I have found. How many of you, by show of hands, have heard of the Tuskegee Airmen? Great, Tuskegee Airmen. They were pilots trained, and in the European theater in World War II, they were the pilots, the black pilots, the red tails, that a lot of the bombers, white pilots of bombers, wanted the Tuskegee Airmen to provide cover for them against enemy apparently, because they had a lot of kills. They were very good at what they did. But I'm a distant cousin, like a first cousin, twice removed, of a guy who's in the middle row, seated third from the left, Joseph Gash. He was a lieutenant. He was a Tuskegee Airman. I mentioned finding a excerpt from a Bible. And actually, as it turns out, when I interviewed my Uncle Tony, my granduncle, and he mentioned, in addition, information about, he called him Sarge, but the general, that he had a cousin, but he couldn't remember the cousin's name, and but he played piano, and he was part of the Gash family that left Galesburg and went to Colorado. But he had written some book, his memoirs. And so with that information, I did this search, and I found this book called Memoirs by Eugene Gash, and I forgot to bring it here, darn it, so you could take a look. But I looked up the publisher, and back then, it wasn't easy to publish a book if you had a small order like it is now. I think it was Ventura Press, if you had a small order. And so I called, no copies left, but they had the name of a woman named Virginia. That was the contact. And so they gave me the contact address. And so I wrote a letter saying who I was. I got a letter back. This was his cousin, Eugene Gash's sister. And she just thought it was wonderful what I was doing. She said, yes, he wrote a book. She sent me a copy of the book. And that picture that I showed you of the general and Anna Maria Dorsey, she sent me that picture. And I'm getting chills just kind of talking about it right now. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to meet Eugene. He had died maybe about just like 5 years before I started my genealogy search. But it was just a rich, she sent me that and this photocopy of the births of Tilly, Matilda Gash, and her children. I think there might only be 11 there, but I think she ended up having 14 children. You can't see it there, but maybe you can see birth and death dates. She said this was brought to Colorado and then ended up in California where she was, and Eugene, taken from a Bible in Galesburg, Illinois, which again was where I was born, and where the Gashes ended up after the war. Okay, so a couple final comments and then take some questions. I just go back to just the treasure trove of information in that document. I was that kid who was interested in listening to the stories, the swap and lies. When I became a social worker, by training. I worked at a place similar to YSS here, but it was in Iowa City. A gentleman named Joe Escobar. And I came into work one day, and Joe had these huge charts. This is pre, Ancestry and 23 computerized ancestry genealogy trials. Just these huge pedigree charts. And Joe had traced his ancestry back to 14th century Spain. And I was just like, how do you do that? And he taught me how to get going. He taught me how to use the, remember the Dewey Decimal System? Well, at the National Archives, I think they still use, it's a codex system. So he taught me how to use that so I could begin searching documents down there. But it's, you can see over time, it takes, it's like a puzzle, but you don't have all the pieces in front of you. You don't know that all the pieces exist. And sometimes you don't know what the picture on the puzzle box says. But between that information, between getting information from, historians about the colored troops, learning about that blacks fought in the Civil War, when I watched the movie Glory, and then actually being out in Washington, D.C. to touch the monument, the memorial of where my ancestors are memorialized, to being at the cemetery all the way back and circling back to Galesburg, Illinois, having been out there to visit my mother and having no idea that the general is buried there. My great-great-grandmother, and someday I've talked about this, I know my siblings might be watching. I'm still thinking about putting some type of memorial for all the folks in those 20 plots out there. But, to have been through all that, to see how it's impacted me, to also on a sidebar know that in Missouri, what I found from the archives down there, that there was an individual involved in the sale of the Shropshire estate, and the dad, the father, my third great grandfather on that side of the family. There was in the pension file, there was a gentleman named Boulware that I don't have confirmation of this, but I have a line of documents showing the Boulware family, their descendant, ended up at the University of Iowa, where I went, but before me, but that's where I had my undergrad and graduate degree from. But in their medical school, one of their live-in housing units is named after the Boulware family. Well, this individual either owned the Gash family or was just involved in the property sale, and to see that two descendants ended up at the University of Iowa. And I think she was the first woman professor in the College of Medicine at the School of Social Work. There's just so many connections between all of us in history, and it's important to never forget the bad things that have happened as part of our history, but the good things that can become of all of this, and to know that the general and God bless Matilda Gash for ending up in Missouri and Galesburg, that her third great-grandfather is serving in the Iowa legislature, one block from where the battle flag of her son fought for my freedom, all of our freedom, and this country. It's just a proud moment for me. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you online. Maybe get the lights on and I can answer some questions. And I'll repeat the questions too. Yes.
I couldn't hear Bell's question. So what is the name of the person that was at Iowa, the one that was either Boulware or Olware?
B as in boy. B as in boy. Yep.
With a Black American whose last name was Boulware, but I'll have to look and see where he's from.
Let me get your contact information after this. This is how we find more. Yeah. Boulware. Yeah, and these documents, you see how hard it is to read, and just trying to remember, decipher. It came up as Bowler, Boller, but through the search and help with genealogy, it turned out Boulware is the family. Yes, sir.
Oh, hang on just a second.
Oh, we got a mic. Oh, great.
For the benefit of the people who are,
Are you going to run around for me, Gloria? Awesome. Thank you,
Thank you.
council member.
Thank you. It was a great presentation. Two things. First of all, would you mind going back to the previous slide? I was watching the lady who had, your relative who had 11 children. The first one was born in 1802 and the last one was born in 1846.
Yeah, and actually, I think there's 11 names that there. I think there might be 3 others, or maybe they didn't survive.
And Tilly, so how do we know about Tilly, how old she was? And I mean, what an incredible person she was to give birth to so many children.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so thank you for going back to that. My question has to do with reparations to former slaveholders. Do you have any idea what kind of settlement they got?
It depended, the amount depended on what they were paid while they served. And something that I didn't bring up, passing around cash in the 1800s and getting people paid, and that didn't, so in many cases, probably most cases, they didn't get paid till the end of the war, or certain periods of time when they would come back. So, they weren't handed cash there. So there were records based on their rank, how much they were paid. I've seen figures of at the end, $100, $200, $300 that the soldier would have received, and in addition, if they owed any money. In fact, several of I mentioned some of the white officers who were actually enlisted men in their units, weren't necessarily honest and conned some of the black soldiers out of some of their money. So really, you're kind of getting it on multiple fronts, being discriminated against actively by some of them.
Most of the former enslaved were illiterate, right? Weren't they?
Yeah, many were. There were some who were illiterate. The 3, Jefferson, Harrison, and Frank, they could not read or write. In fact, they signed with an X, and on the forms you see it says, their stamp is the way they refer to it. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. When you talked about the pension, right? Is that like a pension, like the general got money, or what does that mean? Okay, so do you know how much money he got? And I mean, it's not that important, but I mean, was it more than what the slave owners got?
Yeah, I don't. He wouldn't have gotten more than what the slaveholder, the person who slaved, what their estate got. But I don't know a total. I don't have a total. I have several of the receipts, and again, this is just part of the pension file and information. I haven't gone through to tally everything up yet, what I could see, but yeah, just yes.
I was curious, what is the rationale for banning the book Roots?
I will refer you to, if you do an online search, Des Moines Register. I'm relying on the Des Moines Register on this. If you Google or search Iowa banned books in school, they had a database, and there were 2 schools. I'm not going to name them here. I will let you look them up. At least as of about 6 months ago, there were 2 schools that their response to what happened in the Iowa legislature related to diversity, equity, and inclusion over the past few years was to ban books. My presumption about Roots is there is a rape scene in here, and I'm speculating that that's why. I mean, I've always believed age appropriate, and so there's certain age child. I wouldn't want them to check this, but our libraries, they monitor that. So, but I'll let you all look at to see if they still are banned in Iowa.
Back here, Ross.
Okay.
Do you know how your ancestors escaped from slavery?
There's, I don't know how, I don't know where. I know that they escaped. I know if you look, Palmyra is on the way down to St. Louis, Missouri, and Quincy is right across. When you get to the Mississippi, is right across there. I keep meaning to get down to the county down there to find who knows where troops might have been or any history to just kind of soak in the environment to see. Anderson, who was interviewed, Harrison, Frank, and Jeff's older brother, but who was in his 80s and had struggled with his memory, he had made a statement that I don't remember if he said the boss or their master had told them if they got away in the night that they'd be free. Essentially, I'm not going to come after you, but it's a little conflicting from what I've heard from others. Yeah.
First, I'd like to thank you for your service to our community in the state legislature.
It's an honor.
So very-
Michelle.
Secondly, I'd like to honor the amount of work that you put into this presentation and to seeking your own roots. It is
Oh, thank
so hard to find these documents, to make sense of them, and to put them in a meaningful order for your own picture of your
Actually, the
past.
struggle, excuse me for interrupting, but the struggle is condensing everything down into, like I said, there's over 300 pages just of the, the records there. But your question, or is just a comment?
Well, I am particularly touched by your first photograph and your great grandmother. It's really hard to get information about women. Often you have to infer, look up the husband, the male member of the household, and infer what her life might have been like. But she has her quilt hung behind her. And that picture was not taken until that quilt was in place. And I believe there was an applique piece next to it. These were really hard to do. They were all done by hand. That's obviously beautifully made. I wish your family had it still.
Yeah, I do,
But that really, to me, that says who she was.
Yes.
And it's so nice that it's there. There are historians who look for photographs that have the women's quilt behind them because that tells a lot about their lives.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then again, Virginia, my distant cousin, the gift that she didn't have to give me, and I'm sure, she probably didn't have many copies of this, if any more. So to have it and to scan it and digitize that and put it out for folks is fantastic. And just the way that the care of how they're dressed. And I mentioned, if you look at the general, you really can't quite see any eyebrows there. And I just keep going back to my Uncle Tony saying that Anna Maria had said, Anna Maria Dorsey's her maiden name, that he was a good timer. Yes.
I have a comment from the chat to share.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing your family history with us. I invite you to visit First U.S. Wait, sorry. It just jumped. I invite you to visit First U.S. Colored Cavalry Private Lives Public Records based on research notes from pension records at the National Archives. The troops are largely from Virginia and North Carolina, but many were born elsewhere. The officers white were from the New York, the Midwest, and Europe. P.S. My father was with the Tuskegee Airmen as well. So many stories we were honored to share. Leslie Anderson.
Thank you, Leslie, so much. And I think on the last slide, I'll have to jump back there. I think I had my email address, and if you wouldn't mind copying and send that to me, that would be great.
We also have a shout out from Gloria Abron from Galesburg. I would like to thank my brother Ross for sharing our family history. Thank you for your comments and attendance.
Okay, so I'm going to embarrass myself because I know my sister Glo would like to say this. Anytime Gloria Terry, my auntie Nora, my older siblings, and aunties. Anytime I'm in front of a group, I'm always afraid that they might stand up and say, "Boy, I used to change your diapers." So there you go, Gloria.
I'm going to follow up since we had another Gloria. I'll take
no.
that as a cue. I'm a little bit confused about how the slave owners could be claiming reparations when your ancestors did not enlist until after the Emancipation Proclamation had been ratified, or whatever the technical term would be for what happened with that.
Yeah. Well, they were still enslaved, and there might be a truer historian in the room here that can add to this. But you know, after the Civil War, it wasn't such. This is a loose interpretation of my interpretation of what some things that had gone on. It wasn't you're the defeated, and therefore you have to surrender unconditionally, right? It was preserve the Union, and just a combination of, you know, there was one piece of legislation to make sure that, you know, that Black soldiers were paid at the same time to preserve the Union. Hey, you can get paid back for the person who was enslaved. And I didn't make it up. You saw the document. You know,
I believe you.
Yeah, I know you believe me, but there are times where you know, when information like that comes out, and there's some folks who don't want to believe their eyes.
So maybe along that same line, do you know whether the pensions that were typically paid to the African American troops were in line with the pensions that were paid to the white troops?
I'm going to assume no.
I would guess no, but I just wondered if you had any.
Well, and
any
actually, I don't have to assume it. I mean, there's information, there's records. One of just if they were going to be paid, the Black troops, how much they were going to be paid. Some were elevated more. There was differences between some of the states. And again, even if they were paid, some were swindled by the officers who of low moral character, you know, and charging more for uniforms and supplies, that type of thing. So unfortunately, again, that's part of who we are as a nation.
Did I see another
Yep.
hand up here?
There's one up here.
Coming along.
Again, I'm not a Civil War expert by any means. It's just some things that I've picked up through this search and from history classes. Yes, sir.
Russ, did I understand you correctly at the beginning that there were some Blacks that served the South?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and in some cases, not necessarily enlisted service. It was well, I mean, the Union Black troops would unload ships and dig trenches. There were in the South and the North. There were those that let me separate those. In the South, troops got to be fed. You know, bunkers have to be built. You know, again, grunt work. And for the Union troops, not everyone wanted to enlist, but they would sign up to be, you know, a worker, a cook, you know, it was a job. And in fact, as Union troops came into, you know, Southern slave states, in some cases, they would try and recruit more soldiers. But when you liberate a town, it's not just the men, it's not just the women, it's the children are following. And so some cases, you know, officers didn't really want to liberate, because what are you going to do with all these folks? And if they're not going to fight, what are you going to do? And in some cases, folks just wouldn't leave. They didn't trust the Union soldiers any more than they did what was known to them.
I'm getting my steps.
Hello, thank you very much. About the slave owners seeking reparations, I think, although it shocks us today, I think at the time, Abraham Lincoln, when he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, was trying to win the war. And he certainly did not want the border states who were still in the Union to rebel. And so he said many times very things that are not necessarily, we don't like to associate with Abraham Lincoln, but that he was willing to do whatever was necessary with slavery in order to save the Union. Free some of the slaves, keep others, let slavery continue. So in the Emancipation Proclamation, as you noted, he only freed those he actually freed no one when the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, because it was only affected those people who were enslaved in places that were then under rebellion that the Union Army had not yet taken over.
Right.
And so people in the border states that were slaveholders, he did not want to enrage them. And so he didn't want to free their slaves for that purpose. And so I'm kind of surprised that they would even take escaped slaves from supposedly loyal slaveholders from the border states. So I was kind of surprised about that. But I imagine that this seeking of reparations at the time was part of that effort of not enraging those people who were, otherwise loyal citizens of the United States, but yet slaveholders. Is kind of this very political type of calculation that he was doing to thread the needle to win the war.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for bringing that up. And also, that's a good reminder, again, how over time we have a rosy-colored view of some of our historical figures, going all the way back to, I don't know if I should open the can about Thomas Jefferson, President Jefferson, and the African-American biracial, multiracial children that some in the Jefferson family acknowledge and embrace, and others who to this day still don't. Any other questions?
Do you know of any other family members that you have that have been enslaved?
Other family members, that entire part of the Gash family. I didn't save it or I didn't include it in this file when I emailed it on my dad's side of the family. My father's side of the family. I've got I should have threw it in here anyway. It's a really great picture of my third great grandmother on my father's side, her daughters, and so my second great grandmother and her sisters. And so they were also, in fact, my great grandmother, when she was a child on my father's side, because she was in her late 90s when she died down in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. So she would have been enslaved too. And I remember, again, it seems like ancient history, but either Thanksgiving or Christmas time, we would load up the cars, and story for another day. Our food would be in brown bags, and we would not stop until we drove down to Arkansas. We wouldn't stop in certain places. And I vividly remember his mother, I'll call it a Southern thing, mother dear, and her mother, his grandmother, was Mama. And so I remember Mama, one of her delicacies was scrambled eggs with pig brains scrambled up with them. But the house that that we would stay at, it was, there was no furnace. It was these burners coming out of the wall. So basically, a gas tube with, with the flame coming out, and it would just get really dry and hot. I have no idea it didn't burst into flames. So on that side of the family too, I know. I also know a couple other interesting things since you're bringing up other folks who were enslaved. Two pieces. So I believe, and I haven't looked at this in a while. Matilda's husband, I want to say it's William Gash. He was either born in Africa or his father was born in Africa, and I've got a couple of those around. But I mentioned the DNA test that I took and my genetic markers, and most African Americans have around 70 to 75% African genetic markers, DNA, and around 20 to 25% European. 23% of my DNA is European, so about 73, 75-ish% is African, mainly Western African. But of my European ancestry, most of it is Irish. And I know that on my another side of the mother's family, I am a Murphy, William Murphy, so Irish, came over from Ireland during the potato famine. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you had gotten to read that memoir you were talking about, and if there's any interesting anecdotes from that.
Yeah, it's the book itself is called Memoirs of My First Cousin Once Removed, Eugene Gash. You may not know this, but he was a classical pianist. There's a period of time in the 1900s, 30s, 40s, 50s, where Blacks in America, musicians, were treated like royalty in Europe to come perform, and not hearing it. So he spent some time in Europe. And in the book, there's some pictures of him, and he had a benefactor who helped pay for his trip over there. But it turns out a couple things when I found about information about him. He was very well. One of his signature pieces that he performed was Magursky's Pictures at an Exhibition, which when I was in marching band in high school, that was one of my favorite marching band pieces. I get chills when I see these little connections. But he performed at Carnegie Hall. He wasn't the first Black to perform there, but he was the first Black solo pianist to perform at Carnegie Hall. And a friend of mine was out there, had gotten a copy of the program that he performed that night. So I've been to Carnegie Hall once, but it was closed. And so I need to get back out there so I can just go on the stage. And that'd be pretty cool.
Russ, you have a lot of information. What are you wishing you had that you have not found in all of those documents?
Matilda Gash was born in Bourbon County, Kentucky. And so I'd like to get there to just be on site to go through some records there to find out if there's any information about her parents. She was born there. I do know that, but how she might have, where her parents might have come from. That's one piece of information. I wish I knew which grave she was buried in Galesburg, Illinois. Those are some, and just my entire. I mean, I have, and my cousin Pam Rhodes in Michigan. She's done a lot on my father's side, and we've kind of exchanged some information. But there's information on my father's side. I mentioned that picture of my third great grandmother, who. If you look at it, I look at it, it's like, gosh, my dad looks exactly like her. I'd like to know more about her and find out about her. And, were there any ancestors on my father's side who were in the Civil War? And there were Blacks who were in the United States Revolutionary War. And that would just be the cherry on top of the cake if I found, some connection there. Yes, fought for the British.
Other questions? I guess we have to say thank you to Ross.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks everyone who streamed it online. Thank the Ames History Museum, the library, the NAACP, all of you for your interest in being here. And email if you have any thoughts or any tidbits. There's some great information shared here. I like to, like I said, there's just, you find a piece of the puzzle, and I encourage you, talk to your parents, talk to your aunties, uncles, just to find out bits of information. And you just never know at what point where some things might converge and you find just a treasure out there. So thank you.